Well, what I want to talk to you about is what the session heading is about, which is religionunplugged.com. What is it, and what are we doing with it? Essentially, we are equipping journalists to cover religion. So there's my contact information. I hope to stay in touch with and get to know many of you. I'd love to meet you post-pandemic if opportunity and the Lord provides that opportunity. So I want to talk by backing up quite a bit, actually, and giving you a big thought. And the big thought is around Bluetooth, this technology that's on many of our devices that actually allows us to connect. It allows my kids to hijack the jazz music I'm playing at dinner to put their own music on where they can have a dance party, right? It's interesting technology that creates interoperability between different kinds of devices. And the backstory, I think there's a parallel between Bluetooth technology and religion journalism. The backstory of how the Bluetooth technology got its name and its logo, which relates to ruins in Scandinavia, right? The Viking culture, relates to a king who around the year 1000 connected some of the warring factions between Norway, Denmark, Harold Bluetooth, which I'm sure many of you know more about than I do. I was just fascinated when I read the story about this corporate logo and how these executives from these wireless companies got together, and one of them had this idea of what Harold Bluetooth did, created peace in that region, and really helped kind of advance the cause of, frankly, Christianity, but also, I think, peace and civility. And I think that may relate to some of what we're trying to do in a big picture sense. Let's first talk about the problem. I'm going to go for about 15 minutes, and we'll take time then to pause and discuss. So I've got the clock running. I want to first set out what's the problem we are addressing with Religion Unplugged and the Media Project. And I'd love to hear your insights about this problem, because in startup culture, when we're trying to offer a solution, first it helps to identify what's the problem we're trying to solve with the solution. So also, of course, because I'm based in New York area, in New Jersey, I'm definitely going to have, of course, a lens from that perspective. So one of the disconnects we see in the United States is that while we have still a large religious contingent, a majority sort of Christian culture, insofar as 70% of Americans identified as Christian at one point with a Pew Research survey, 25% as evangelical. In more recent numbers, I think the evangelical numbers are holding steady, but overall Christianity is in statistical decline, those who identify as Christians. There's more identifying as atheists, agnostic, or nuns. But what's interesting regarding the media is that there's an inverse dynamic where both the people who work in journalism and media tend to not be from religious backgrounds as much as the rest of America. And if we look on the right there at the coverage, religion is often underplayed in the news. And when it is covered in the news, sometimes it's portrayed in conflict narratives. What religious people are doing that's bad, or fighting inside a denomination. And that also affects, I think, the way people tend to view religion, or religious people of faith. Of course, you see some great portraits of religious people sometimes too, so I don't want to generalize here too much, but I think this is some of the backdrop of the problem. So one of the questions that I'd like to hear your thoughts on during the break is, how and why does the mainstream media misinterpret, misrepresent, or ignore people of faith? I'd like to hear your insights on that. Here's just a couple kind of starter thoughts on it ahead of the discussion. One, some of us are sports fans, right? Or music fans, and pre-pandemic, we may have memories going to a stadium where you're watching your sports team, or going to a concert, right? Or you tune in on TV. These are big events with a lot of people. And sometimes I think the media always recognizes that sports are important parts of people's lives, or music and culture. And I think it has to news media and journalists have to remind themselves that indeed religion is also a huge part of people's lives. And certainly we look at a photo like this and realize, oh yes, Catholicism is a huge thing. so many millions, billions of people who follow this religion and the Pope. There's a defined place where there's meetings at the Vatican, et cetera, like this. But I think the media sometimes forgets that religion also looks differently. And from Norway to Africa to Bogota, Colombia to Dubuque, Iowa, there's every Sunday and sometimes Wednesdays and throughout the week, churches like this are parts of our community that hold people together, that do so much good, that change people's lives, that save people from addictions, that help educate children, form support networks and communities. And I think the media just either forgets it, ignores it, it misses it sometimes. And so I think that's part of the challenge here as a journalist, as a storyteller approaching religion and faith as a topic. So another question for discussion that you can think about is how and why does the church misinterpret, misrepresent, or ignore the importance of journalism and the news media? Because my thesis is that it's not all the media's fault. I do think the church and religious people have some responsibility, we might say, as well. And just to put some color on that, we look in the United States here, January 6th, I watched in horror as people, and a lot of people with religious symbols or rhetoric took over our nation's capital with violence, some of them with violent motives and actions. And we saw a lot of reporting around conspiracy theory movements. And I have people, religious people even close in my family, who believe these kinds of things. And to me, it's an unfortunate portrait, but I don't think the media is making this one up. I wonder what is causing some religious people and some Christians to become unmoored from objective facts or reality. It troubles me. Another just picture here of sort of the problem is if the media doesn't understand religious people and religion as lived in people's lives, you see mistakes in coverage like this. One of our basketball stars, Steph Curry at the Golden State Warriors, one of the most incredible famous basketball players who's changed the game with his three-point shooting. He's a Christian believer, and actually on his shoes, at one point he wrote, "I can do all things," which reference to a scripture verse, right? And even with Under Armour, his shoe contract company, he has scripture, involved in his shoes and on his Twitter feed. And at one time, a journalist profiling Steph Curry didn't understand that was a scripture verse and didn't apparently ask Steph Curry or research it, and just thought it was a sign of arrogance and noted that in the piece about Steph Curry. And so this is the kind of thing, one kind of signifier of what we see when people they're not comfortable with religion or don't know how to ask people about their faith and sort of get a story completely wrong. Okay, so another question, do we need more and better bridges between mainstream outlets and more niche faith-based, denomination-based, sectarian publications? When we think about our media ecology, do we need more bridges between the faith communities, secular communities? Looks like I've got a little time to keep going here, which is good. So I'm going to just start in now to tell you a bit about what we're trying to do at Religion Unplugged as a solution to some of these issues. And then I'll pause when we get to case studies, I think, and we'll have time to go through those in the second part. So as Lars mentioned, the parent nonprofit organization or NGO of Religion Unplugged is the Media Project. And that was started by several people, but led by Arne Fieldstedt from Norway, as we mentioned earlier. And the Media Project does education and training for journalists in different parts of the world. We have 4 or 5 training programs in almost each continent. And our flagship program is at the Poynter Institute in Florida, usually every fall. We're doing it digital because of the pandemic, but hopefully 2022 we'll be back bringing about 15 of these journalists from around the world for a week to Florida to train them in leadership, journalism topics, new trends, etc., and to help them become better mentors in their home countries and newsrooms. So this was a group of journalists that we had a few years ago. And something notable as you look around here, you see people from different regions, of course, different uh, 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 dresses and whatnot. But I'd say the majority of our members and people who come to our trainings are Christians, but we also welcome people from other faiths or no faith. And, we look at their applications, we look for their potential as a mentor and someone who can learn, either does already or wants to learn, good journalism in general and religion reporting in particular. And so this may be sort of mind blowing to some of my friends and brethren in the Christian community, brothers and sisters. But here's why I think it's important. Um, as an anecdote, we have three men from India in this picture. We have Dominique Thomas in the front row in the white, who was at All India Radio, and he comes from a Catholic background in Kerala. And then Sanjeev with glasses and an orange shirt in the second row, he also worked at All India Radio. One of his parents is Hindu, one is Catholic, and he's not sure which he is, but he likes the Beatles, And then next to him in the red plaid shirt was Zafar, who's from Kashmir. And Zafar comes from a Muslim background. And these three guys all got along, as did the whole group. And Zafar would join the optional kind of prayer Bible study time in the morning by the pool before they'd go to the training center. And we became such good friends this week that Zafar, midway through the week at a dinner, Zafar just stood up and told us something very personal, which he said, "You see this bump on my nose, and maybe some of you wondered what it was. I'd like to tell you my story." And he said, when I was a young journalist, 24 years old, in my first newsroom job in Kashmir at a TV station, one day militants came to our office looking for my boss, who had the same name as me. And they thought I was the boss, so they shot me through the legs. They shot me through the back of the head, and the bullet went through my brain, out my nose. And he described in gruesome detail what that was like. Thankfully, we'd finished our dinner, but described what walking across the room and collapsing and seeing, all these details about that experience. And he wasn't supposed to walk again, talk again, do journalism again, etc. But somehow miraculously, the bullet missed the vital regions of his brain, and he, a few months later, was back in a newsroom. And that was very special to hear. And we did a podcast with Zafar later. He also got laid off later, and he's been a great correspondent for us, for Religion Unplugged, a nonprofit news outlet, covering stories from Kashmir. And he's covered stories about Sikhs, about Christians, about Muslims. And for me and our organization, we think having friends like Zafar is really important, and caring about friends who are people also on a path of faith, but who are able to listen to each other and to report fact-based stories as journalists. Here's another picture from our program in Prague that normally happens every summer in Prague. This is the first year we had it, and we have journalists, young journalists, that come from all over Central Eastern Europe, some from the Middle East, some from the US or Latin America. And we present them with journalism training, as well as especially on religion reporting. And we find that some of them are from atheist backgrounds, but they said, I would have understood the importance of religion in people's lives. And this week helped me understand that. And I, as a young journalist in Germany or wherever I am, I want to make sure that I look for and consider doing stories about religion and religious people. And we've received wonderful stories from many of the people in this picture and in other cohorts for Religion Unplugged. All right, so let's talk just a little bit about what is Religion Unplugged. It's an online news magazine. We're up to 100,000 monthly page views. And by the way, we used to publish all of our religion reporting at the mediaproject.org site. And we kind of realized over time, there's too much going on one website where you have educational program info and nonprofit info as well as journalism. So we decided to create a separate brand that was more of a daughter standalone journalism brand. And that's what Religion Unplugged is. And so we have the news magazine, online news magazine. We call it slow journalism. We don't want to flood the internet with too many stories. we want to do 10 to 15 per week. News stories, feature stories, opinion pieces, culture pieces about religion. They all have to have something about religion. And we want to have stories that others don't have, ideally. And we have a podcast that's usually every week where we have 30-minute longer interviews with thought leaders, authors, things like that, people who writing, talking, doing stuff on religion. Of course, we have all the social channels on Facebook, an email newsletter, Twitter, Instagram, Flipboard, YouTube. We have a Substack weekly column that's a roundup of religion news by Bobby Ross that's worth subscribing to as well. So, trying to answer some of your questions early on, what does the name mean, Religion Unplugged? So we workshopped several ideas, and I think that the idea that struck us was that the notion of unplugging from religion as just an academics concept and plugging into it as a lived experience. The notion of an acoustic, authentic experience, like MTV had this concept called Unplugged, and from about 10 years, 1989 to 1999, and a lot of the concerts they produced and the shows they produced with that concept became best-selling albums. Like the best-selling live album of all time was Eric Clapton Unplugged, which sold 26 million copies. And the reason why, I think, is that people yearn for a powerful, intimate experience, maybe especially in a wired world where everybody's plugged in with Bluetooth and everything else, that people want to hear an acoustic version of a song sometimes. And so also there's a notion that many people, as we know, are unplugging from religion. And we want to be a place that they could read journalism as well, atheists, agnostics, skeptics, or nuns, or at least a place they're not afraid to click and approach and consider people who are religious, people who do have faith. Our brand and logo represent a power plug-in. So plugging into something or unplugging from something, it also connotes the Trinity or other religious symbols. It also sort of resembles a churning forward motion. And so that was the designer's take on that logo. When we launched, here's what the site looked like. It looks a bit different now with much more, I'd say a little more robust, but we liked the clean black and white look. And you can see early on how we have stories from all over the world. So yeah, I just want to present a growing trend in the US and I think other parts of the world, which is nonprofit journalism. And basically the context is that we're seeing during the pandemic, more journalists being laid off than ever. We've seen at newspapers in the US, the number of employees at newspapers dropped by half, from 71,000 to 35,000 over the last 10 years or so. Meanwhile, some digital journalism has been picking up in employment, but we're seeing problems like this study from the Hussman School of Journalism at University of North Carolina shows that small papers are closing. Local news is fading away. The economic model and the entrepreneurship there is not turning the corner to sustain local news outlets, given big tech, social media, all the trends that we know. What it's leading to is what we call news deserts. So this map shows you the places, I believe, in places in, I believe it's a place in white that don't have news coverage, essentially, where local news is disappearing, okay? So there's a lot of foundation money interested in that. I heard one entrepreneur say that journalists are kind of increasingly like Jedi Knights. They're missing arms, they're in exile, they're trying to keep the craft alive and trying to figure out how to do that because we believe it is important. So one trend is that subscriptions are growing. Some people are more willing to pay for news directly rather than having advertising pay for it because Google has taken some of that advertising. A lot of foundation money is flowing into nonprofit outlets, including, you can see, religious groups are funding nonprofit outlets. And so here's a picture of foundation funding, nonprofit funding to news coverage in particular. So there's various, investigative reporting is a big focus. There is some tribalism, conservative or liberal, more left-leaning news. And so we're interested in subject beat specific coverage, religion reporting. And we think that that is often missing in this new nonprofit foundation-funded journalism. And so where we fit in that firmament of religion reporting, so we fit in the nonprofit news sector as a missing niche. Now, we are friendly with a lot of these publications, and we partner with some of them. But we want to be less sectarian than the denominational press. We want to be more curious about religion than the mainstream media. We tend to be more global because of the network we have around the world, thanks to Arnie and our work in the last really 2 decades. And we also want to be a place where new and younger religion reporters can gain experience and published work alongside veteran religion reporters. So that's where we fit. One thing I'm noticing is younger people and cultural messages they're getting. I think that young people in the United States, anyways, sort of even from Christian communities, they react to a notion of Christianity trying to dominate, and I realize there's different worldviews competing, right? But I think young people, including Christians in the United States, when I start talking about the depth and breadth of Christianity in the world, the contributions of Christianity from Africa, and when they start realizing, I think the Lausanne idea, the global connection, and faith as lived, and the positive elements of faith, that it really changes the mindset and the conversation. And I think some of the case studies can show that. So I use some I words here to explain what we're trying to do in our content. We're trying to be international in our focus. And we're able to do that because we've got 2,000 people in our database, many of them journalists who pitch us stories from around the world. And our training programs in different parts of the world each year help us connect with the people we know, or reconnect with them, and to make new connections. And so we get great pitches, great story ideas from around the world that help us show. So here's one case study I want to just walk through, show you. I tried to pick a few with some interesting images for you guys today. And this story in 2019 was done by one of our board members who's based in India, and a partner, Vishal Arroya, had led a group called Stories Asia. And we had a fellow we were paying named Avinash Giri, who I believe is from a Hindu background. So Avinash, Vishal, and others from the Stories Asia team decided to go cover Kashmir for a bit. And they got into a place in Kashmir this day, September 2nd, 2019, that was agreed that was like the worst protest day at that time, when India had started cracking down on Kashmir. And our people told us that other media were not able to, or didn't get into this place of protest. So our team were literally the only ones there that day, the only ones with cameras who could be a witness to this protest. And so I'll just show you some of the photos. So this young woman, got tear gas in her eyes. There were signs. This guy had been injured in previous protests and came out. So his community was very happy to see him there. Young children were part of this protest. Normally they were not, but this day they were. And this photo I find kind of chilling. This guy was peppered with, I guess, shotgun pellets. And these kinds of stories and images, again, we were the only media that we know of that were able to get there and cover that this day. And they were in jeopardy from the police and the protesters not knowing who they were and pushing them around a bit. But we were able to document that particular day when, at least at that time in particular, the world needed to know about what was going on. And there was a religion element and political element, of course, to the conflict in Kashmir. And we were there. So we want to be international and there on the ground in the places when we need to be. Some of the other stories that we've done, they're not always PR. They're not always positive, and we don't believe we should be doing PR for God, because God doesn't need us to do PR for him. So we do investigative reporting at times. And so this story actually won a lot of awards for us. Basically, we uncovered a whistleblower's report actually a guy from Minnesota contacted me through a friend and was trying to get coverage in the big papers in the United States about this whistleblower report that there was $100 billion investment fund in the LDS church, the Mormon church, connected, housed inside a nonprofit structure, and it grew in just 20 years to be this bigger than any hedge fund except for one hedge fund, bigger than every university endowment in the United States. And nobody knew about this fund. And so we broke that story. We had lawyers go through it so we wouldn't be sued, and we had no criticisms of this story in terms of its quality and its accuracy. The Washington Post heard about the story finally 3 days before we published. We were working on it for a few weeks, and the Washington Post raced into action, published on the front page the day after we published. And so our stories, won a bunch of awards for investigative reporting, religion reporting. And we believe that, and I said on one of our podcasts that we're not trying to attack the Mormon church. We're trying to shine a light of truth on religion in general. And if we find an investigative story that's important on any religion, we'll do it. That's if it's important enough to us. And we're seeing long-term impact of this story. The SEC regulators, financial regulators now require the church to disclose their holdings in this fund every 3 months. And there's some other things like that came about. So we are sometimes investigative. We are also we want to always be informative about religion. And so last year we started a column with Bobby Ross, a longtime religion reporter. He edits the Christian Chronicle newspaper, a denominational paper, and he used to work at the Associated Press. And this roundup column is a good thing to subscribe to or to tune in for each week, or to follow Bobby on Twitter, because he highlights excellent pieces around the country. Because some of us don't have time to look for religion stories at the New York Times, Time Magazine, Washington Post, LA Times. And so he does that and presents to us a roundup each week. So we're trying to, I think, create infrastructure here for religion reporting as a beat, as a topic. We try to do illuminative reporting. And last summer, when a lot of the interest around George Floyd's death and concerns about that death, as that video was going viral and people were taking to the streets, one of our interns, Liza Vandenboom, started seeing on Twitter and other places people saying, hey, George Floyd had a faith community in Houston, and he was trying to do ministry in Houston. So she quickly contacted his friends in that ministry and pastor and did an interview and wrote a piece. I think CT had a piece about it the same day, but ours might have been first. And Religion News Service republished that, Newsweek republished that. So our work is open source. Anybody can republish as long as they link back to us. So we've had, I think Dagen in Norway, we're grateful. They've even translated a couple pieces from us to Norwegian. So this piece this was a case study in an intern, a college student, spotted something that the big league religion reporters didn't see. She did the story first, and she is actually named the best religion reporter, student or undergrad reporter in the world last year for this and other pieces that she did. And we believe that we need to look for religion, religion wherever it is, and look for where it may be missing from stories. We also realize increasingly we want to be insightful about religion in public life. And where does religion appear in culture, including in books, in film, in television, in art, in music, all these zones? Here's one example of, we are kind of interested in how Kanye West and Justin Bieber, their expressions of faith in their music and in their lives. Again, it doesn't mean that we believe they are necessarily paragons of virtue or theological soundness, but we see people like that expressing something, we're interested in it, and we want to understand it and write about it because they have huge audiences and platforms, etc. And you can kind of see our culture section snapshot here, how we cover, art at MoMA that touched on religion, a PBS documentary about the Black church that got a lot of, we evaluated that, wrote about it. We had a travel piece from Kenya about a sect that prays to saints at formerly pagan shrines. So we're looking around the world, throughout culture, for where religion is being explored and manifested and is maybe of interest to our readers. We're interested also in inspiring stories about people and about how how religion is lived. So I was at a family reunion in Minnesota a couple of years ago, and one of my cousins is a wood carver, and he was telling me at the barbecue with the family that he studies with this Greek guy who's a Orthodox a Christian and who carves a lot of the altarpieces for Orthodox churches around the United States and elsewhere. So I said, I'd love to meet this guy. So one afternoon I went over to met him in his workshop behind his house and just had a wonderful time and did a profile about him. And I loved the photos and his personality. So that was a fun story. One of our best traffic stories was a young journalist from California studying with us for a semester at the King's College, did a story for the Brooklyn paper where she was working about an Orthodox Jewish judge who had an unusual friendship with a clerk who's a Muslim, conservative Muslim woman with a head covering, and just did a story about their friendship and ability to work together. And Muslim communities shared that wildly. We got a lot of traffic because they appreciated a portrait of people who are both different religions. People normally think who might not get along, but they did get along, and they have strong beliefs, but we're able to develop a friendship. So we have stories, Lebanon, climate, we won some awards for our coverage of climate science, a climate scientist, PhD student at Princeton, who's a Christian. So these are kind of inspiring stories that we look for as well. Another photo of our friend, the woodcarver here. We want to be innovative in both in our approach to religion reporting and in our approach to sort of distribution and technology of how to surface journalism out to people. So, I built a tool with some funding from a major foundation, Knight Foundation, that called CX tool. The company's Vet Inc., VettNews.com. And so we actually have that tool. What it does, it better manages corrections and reader feedback. So we want to be a leader in respecting the reader and interacting with the reader, engaging with our readers. And so that tool that we built and which runs at Religion Unplugged is also actually running at 20 other news outlets right now, including college newspapers, the Tampa Bay Times, papers in North Dakota, and we're going to keep developing that tool. So that's how we want to be innovative. We're trying out Substack right now with Bobby's newsletter. We've tried Facebook Live events with scholars on Christianity in Africa. Last summer, we wanted to, as all this concern and interest and discussion on racial justice in the United States was happening, we wanted to go bigger and deeper on it and look back at contributions of the Black church in America and of Christianity from Africa, et cetera. We're working on Instagram, Flipboard. We're almost any new tech, we want to be on it and try it out and see if it works for us to gain audience and distribute our stories. We want to try to go in depth. There's a lot of times where we try to pause and say, should we take more time with this story and ask more questions? Should we send somebody on a trip somewhere to go in depth? So, one example here was we saw an incident in Texas where a guy pulled a gun out in the middle of a church service, and it was all on YouTube. You can Google this and watch it. And then all of a sudden, 3 or 4 people in the church pulled out guns and shot the guy. He shot 2 people in the church, killed 2 people, but they shot him. And I'm watching this, it's an Old West shootout, and I was a little shocked, even though I'm from South Dakota, and I've shot guns growing up, but I just didn't know people were bringing them to church so much. I started posting, Bobby Ross had exclusive coverage of that because that was his denomination and the pastor, he was the only journalist pastor spoke to. So we republished Bobby's stories on our site. I put them on Facebook and I said to my friends, I'm like, hey, is this normal? Does your church carry guns? And lo and behold, I was blown away, pardon the pun, I was blown away by the reaction. And I basically heard more people are carrying guns than I ever knew in churches in America. And we wanted to explore it. So actually my last trip before the coronavirus pandemic last year, I went to Colorado, I have a family member who lives there and who's involved in this church security movement. And so I was introduced to churches and leaders of this movement. Colorado Springs is kind of an epicenter for that movement. And this story, we're winning quite a few awards for that right now. And I'll just show you some of the photos from it. This photo here, this was the story on the right, a screenshot of it. And the lead photo there is, at a gun range with the church security team at this one church. And here, before we went to the gun range, they had a training session where they actually studied the YouTube video of that Texas church and analyzed every second, every movement that the security team made to take out the shooter. And again, what made me happy was we wrote a 5,000 or 6,000 word, a very long story. My goal was to show both sides and many sides, and understanding, not me condemning or celebrating this church for having a life security gun-toting team, but just trying to understand and show with data and with photos and videos and anecdotes, et cetera, of why this is happening in the United States. And so that's what we did. And I heard from people on different perspectives that they said they couldn't tell if we were for or against it. And that's exactly what I wanted. So yeah, more photos. This church, they actually had fake guns, and they ran a scenario where a guy showed up at the church and they had to use their walkie-talkies and disarm the guy and get him out before he shot anybody. So it shows you how serious they take it. They do a lot of training, like every week, every month. Here's some images from the gun range. One interesting aspect is, because we could go in depth, one thing I noticed is that this whole phenomenon, part of it is a way for male bonding in the church in the United States, a way for men to feel like they have a purpose, and that might lead us to other insights. Is there other purposes that maybe we're overlooking that men need in church, other things that they could be doing? Or is this a good purpose? You can see these guys are pretty good shots here. This is in a basement. Actually, Colorado Springs has a lot of military people too. And at this church, they were training in a basement using high-tech stuff. And there's like very high-level military people on this particular church security team. It's why I had to shoot in the shadows and couldn't show anybody's faces in some of these photos. I had a photojournalist and videographer who didn't make the flight. So a lot of these images I took with just my iPhone and videos. And so I was kind of proud that we won some awards for this. I'll show you a couple little videos.
Both of them were bad. Okay, no problem. All right, Dan, are you ready?
So they were taking turns having a contest who could shoot the target the fastest. They were even, as they were setting up this drill, seeing the time it took for someone to shoot the shooter in Texas. Can anybody beat that time and be as ready for an attack scenario? So what I did was, all these, in the storytelling, I was trying to do something maybe innovative, which was, as the story, as you read through the story online, you encounter videos that explain the thing that you're reading about. And we also spoke to this guy, Carl Chin, was a kind of a godfather of this church security team movement. He worked at Focus on the Family when there was a bomb threat. And then he later went to a church where a shooter came and they had to take out a shooter. So he actually tracks around the country. And part of the reason why these people are into this concept that might be odd to some of you or me is that this guy actually tracks and says, like, for some reason in society where there's sometimes anti-religion, we see shootings at mosques, at synagogues, at churches. People sometimes have an animus toward religion itself, or people of faith, or houses of worship. Or sometimes you see domestic disputes and someone angry about a divorce or whatever goes to the church to cause damage to their family or whatnot. So my videographer did make it, and we made a 20-minute kind of mini documentary with all the footage and photos we got. I'm not going to show you the whole thing, but this has been winning some awards as well. So if you go to the story, you can find that there. Okay, so you can kind of see we took a multimedia approach with that one. When we find we have a video or the video editor talent on our team, we try to maximize the use of that talent. We try to make kind of like stewards of our resources. We figure out what our current interns or fellows are good at and try to help them flourish. All right, here's one more case study that I think is pretty powerful. Avinash, again, our friend, our fellow in India, again, he's Hindu. He's not a Christian believer as far as we knew, but he wanted to go 1 year later to Sri Lanka after the Easter bombing, and he wanted to talk with survivors. So he went there. These are photos he took, including of this young girl. She was blinded. Debbie lost both her eyes, one of her two brothers, her eyes, her parents, and one of her two brothers in the Easter bombing. The coordinated suicide bombings, as you may remember, killed 290 people, injured more than 500 others in different cities. Uh, they killed 26 people at her church and 100 and injured more than 100 at her church, Evangelical Zion Church. The Islamic State had claimed responsibility for that. So I'm so glad Avinash went back to find out what happened to people like Debbie. We learned that her parents had been Sunday school teachers, and they owned a bookshop in the church's premises. The bomb exploded, of course. It killed her and injured her aunt, and her aunt and uncle took her in after that incident. And I think those are the ones pictured here, I believe. And just look at the quotes that, Avinash had to reach out to us sometimes as he was writing this and ask us questions about Christianity to see if he was explaining things accurately. And if you just look at some of these quotes here, Debbie wants to be a Sunday school teacher just like her mother. She says that when she's older, she'll spread the gospel to thousands of people. Jesus has already made eyes for me. The family said that after the blast, their faith in Jesus had become stronger. I can't see the rest of the quote here because I can see all you, it's covering up that part of my slide. She has since rededicated her life to Jesus. He is our strength by which through these times. I don't know if that's the aunt, but these are just powerful quotes. And to find out what happened after the attack. And here you see people's blood was splattered on the statue of Jesus the Christ in this church. And it looks like they put a glass case around it to remember that. This is powerful stuff. And I think the world needs to know about it and not to forget what happened, but also to see the resilience of people and of faith after this kind of tragedy. Okay, one other kind of story in case study here is, because I know we do need to get to another break at some point. A couple of years ago, I had a student who came to my office named Wes. His mom was from Ecuador, father airline pilot, and he had an interesting story how he came to New York and came to the King's College to work in a restaurant originally. He got transferred to New York to manage a restaurant, started going to college, and his passion was photography, street photography. And he was climbing cranes, climbing buildings, taking pictures from up there to put on Instagram, people applauding this on Instagram. But he actually got arrested at one point, and he almost got kicked out of school. And so anyways, he kind of wandered into my office asking what is journalism. And we started talking, and he showed me the photos he takes. And I said, I think you're a photojournalist, Wes. And we started talking about that, giving him books and everything. And next thing, he says, well, look, my dad's an airline pilot. And I said, where are you going this summer? And I said, I'm going to Kenya and Prague for work with the media project. And he asked if he could come. So I said, okay, well, that's interesting. I hadn't thought of that, but yeah, if you come, we'll get you the hotel room, and if you cover your flight, well, we made a deal. So he came with, and the guy is just very good at finding stories. And he'd go out in Nairobi and if I was in a meeting, he was out finding stories, and then we'd contact the people, do the story. So we did a few stories together, including we went to church one day and we met a guy at church here pictured on the left, upper left, who happened to be the coach of the Paralympic running team in Kenya. And that just sounded pretty cool because we know Kenyans are very good at marathons and do very well, Ethiopians and Kenyans and international running. But, it's fascinating to think about the disabled and Paralympic runners. Kenyans also do well in that sector. And so we asked the coach, is there one person on this team that you would focus in on for an interview or a profile? And he said, oh yeah, this guy, Henry, pictured here. So Henry's brother is a world champion marathoner, Olympic gold medalist, all this stuff, world record holder. And Henry's whole families are famous runners. And he was blind essentially and never was able to compete until I believe a missionary told him, hey, you're fast, you should run in the Paralympics. And so he started doing that late in life and won a bunch of gold medals, was a UN Person of the Year. So we did a profile of him, and Wes, got these photos published. We actually printed them and have them in our journalism offices on big pictures. So it was a good story for us. It was a great clip for Wes. Wes did a lot of great coverage for us, by the way, and started winning national awards for photojournalism as a student. And he got hired at the New York Daily News, where he's a reporter now. And he's so this again, he's a guy who I think will continue to be a talented journalist. And I think he's a guy who also reconnected with his own faith through covering religion and learning about it. And I think definitely understands where religion appears in stories and how not to miss it in stories and in people's lives. So I think that's a good anecdote and case study of what we're trying to accomplish here. So where are we trying to go? Next steps in the future? Basically, we're trying to grow in quality, grow in audience, grow in the network effects with our partners. Trying to figure out down the road, yes, we have donor funding now, but we're trying to consider how could we grow revenue in the future so that this is sustainable long term. We do think awards are nice. We don't do journalism to win awards, but we are grateful for journalism that we do that does win awards. So there's Liza. She's coming back now that she graduated from King's. She's going to come back as a fellow and associate editor for us for this coming year. Here's a fun story. We want to basically continue what we're doing with our international focus. We don't want to lose the international focus. This young woman, Carol Wambui, was an Arnie Fieldstead scholar. We have a scholarship that brings at least one international student to King's College per year, and they intern with us at Religion Unplugged. And so Carol was our fellow last spring from Kenya during a pandemic. Her father is a minister, pastor in Kenya. So pandemic happens. She goes on spring break with a friend, her roommate and friend, to Indiana, thinking she was going to go for a week. And it turns out she got stuck there, couldn't come back to New York, and couldn't go back to Kenya. So her visa got extended, and the church and the family in Indiana basically adopted her, gave her a role, a job, and that church is a sister church now to the one in Kenya. And we're going to do a story about her, by the way, for Religion Unplugged, to tell this story that you're hearing exclusive here first. So she's basically got a job. She met her husband and got married, and so she has a whole new life in Indiana. And there's now an international connection between these churches and these families, which, the pandemic wasn't all bad when you hear stories like that, I think. Here's a picture of some other team members when we got our first EPI award. We've gotten a couple of these EPI awards now. And then just to close out, back to King Harold, did he realize that peace comes from Christians having mutual understanding among each other, and people having mutual understanding? That faith comes from connection and curiosity and knowledge. Was that part of that story? And here's just a photo of Roskilde in Denmark, where I happened to be staying at an Airbnb once, and found this church, of course, where we don't know if King Harold is buried there. Some other Danish royalty were buried there, but he's I think said to be buried near there. And so his legacy lives on. And that's the end of what I wanted to share and show you. I appreciate your attention, and again, more insights